Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. In December 1941, the Japanese Air Force launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor. It was the event that basically brought the United States into the Second World War. Well, a few months later, on the 18th of April 1942, the US Air Force carried out its first ever bombing raid over Japan, dropping incendiary bombs on a number of Japanese cities. It was known as the Doolittle Raid. There were 16 bombers took part in that raid, and 15 of them ended up going down in occupied China. Most of the aircrew were actually smuggled out safely by Chinese resistance. Nevertheless, there were 8 of those airmen that were captured by the Japanese, and one of those airmen was Jacob de Chazer. And these 8 airmen that were captured became among the earliest of the American prisoners of war kept by the Japanese. And they were subjected to torture, to beatings, to starvation, and they were held in solitary confinement for 34 months. Now, when you think in Western prison systems, to be held in solitary confinement for even a few days is considered a really harsh punishment. To be kept in solitary confinement for almost 3 years has a tremendous effect on people's mental health. Of those 8 airmen, only 4 of them survived, and Jacob de Chazer was one of the 4 who survived. In the midst of all their ordeals, somebody gave them a Bible. And Jacob de Chazer read that Bible and gave his life to Jesus Christ. In fact, he said this. He said, "God gave me grace to confess my sins to him, and he forgave me all my sins and saved me for Jesus' sake. And suddenly I discovered that God had given me new spiritual eyes, and that when I looked at the enemy officers and the guards who had starved and beaten my companions and me so cruelly, I found my bitter hatred for them changed to loving pity." After the war in 1948, he returned to Japan again. What he did, he went back first to America, went to Bible college, graduated from Bible college, got married to his bride Florence, and then returned to China. Himself and Jacob and Florence returned as Free Methodist missionaries to China. And they settled in Nagoya, the very city that de Chazer's plane had bombed during the Doolittle Raid. He said how much better it is to go out to conquer evil with the gospel of peace. And while he was there, at about 1950, he felt the Lord leading him to go on a fast. So Jacob de Chazer went on a fast and began to pray for the salvation of Japan. Actually news got out of this, affected a lot of Japanese people, that a foreigner who had been starved in a concentration camp during the war would now be willingly going without food because of his love for the Japanese people. That really amazed a lot of people. Well, during that time that he was fasting, he wrote a tract. And that tract was read by a man called Mitsuo Fuchida. And he was the officer who had commanded the air attack on Pearl Harbor. And this man came to Christ through the tract that Jacob de Chazer had written. And a few months later, the two of them began preaching together to crowds. The Japanese captain who led the Pearl Harbor attack, and the American airman who was involved in the Doolittle Raid. And with their message of forgiveness and reconciliation, they brought thousands to Christ with their message of God's sacrificial love for all people and the power of forgiveness through Jesus Christ. Jacob and Florence de Chazer, they ministered for 30 years in Japan and planted 23 churches in a country that's acknowledged to be one of the hardest mission fields to share the gospel in. What a testimony of somebody who had every reason to hate, and yet he was able to forgive. He was able to love. He was able to preach the gospel to the people he had formerly dropped bombs on, and was able to even be reconciled with the man who had carried out the raid that had brought America into the Second World War. There is a power in forgiveness, a power that is let loose in our lives, and that power comes from the Word of God. And if today you need to forgive somebody, if you're carrying something in your heart against somebody else, even if you're in the right, if you will find the grace to forgive, you will be amazed at what God will do in your life as a result. May God bless you today. Join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.